Imagine holding a small, dark, unremarkable grain of dust between your fingers. It is about a millimeter across, roughly the size of a poppy seed. It does not glow, it does not move, it carries no obvious sign of the extraordinary secret locked within it. But what scientists found inside grains just like this one, grains scooped from the surface of an ancient asteroid and carried back to Earth across hundreds of millions of miles, has forced them to rethink some of the most fundamental questions in all of science. Questions about where we came from, about whether the chemistry of life is a rare cosmic accident, or whether it is woven into the very fabric of the universe itself. This is the story of asteroid Bennu, a spacecraft called OSIRIS-REx, and the most scientifically significant sample of rock and dust ever retrieved from deep space. And it begins, appropriately, with a problem. A very frustrating, very human problem. NASA could not open the box. On the 24th of September, 2023, a small capsule the size of a large cooking pot screamed through Earth's atmosphere at roughly 27,000 miles per hour and deployed a parachute over the Utah desert. It was the end of a 7-year round-trip journey to the near-Earth asteroid Bennu, and it made history as the first American mission to bring back a sample from an asteroid in deep space. Recovery teams in white protective suits rushed to retrieve it. The world held its breath. Scientists who had spent decades of their careers working toward this moment gathered at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, ready to peer inside one of the most carefully collected packages in human history. But when the team attempted to open the primary sample container, a mechanism called the TAGSM head, which stands for Touch-and-Go Sample Acquisition Mechanism, they ran into a problem that sounds almost comically mundane given the scale of the mission. 2 of the 35 fasteners on the TAGSM head could not be removed with the current tools approved for use in the OSIRIS-REx glove box. 2 tiny bolts out of 35 were stuck. And because the entire sample had to be handled under strictly controlled conditions inside a sealed, nitrogen-filled glove box to protect the pristine asteroid material from any contamination by Earth's atmosphere or moisture, the engineers could not simply grab a standard wrench from the tool chest and have a go at it. The tools had to be purpose-built, tested, and approved for use inside that specific environment. The space agency anticipated that the asteroid sample canister would be opened sometime in early 2024, as engineers fashioned new tools to help crack it open while still preserving the pristine rocks. For months, that was the situation. One of the greatest scientific treasures ever brought to Earth was sitting in a room in Houston, tantalizingly close, largely sealed. The frustration in the scientific community was palpable, and yet, even during that waiting period, the team managed to extract something extraordinary. The curation team disclosed the extraction and collection of 70.3 grams of Bennu material from the capsule even before it was officially opened, accessing material from the external area and a section from inside the sample collector's head through a mylar flap. Even the crumbs on the outside of the container were scientifically precious. The full sample, though, would have to wait. Months later, engineers managed to solve the fastener dilemma using multi-part tools made out of non-magnetic stainless steel. On January 10th, 2024, the OSIRIS-REx curation team managed to remove the TAGSM head, where the bulk of the asteroid sample was stored, freeing the 2 stubborn fasteners that had held it shut since it landed on Earth. The total collected sample weighed in at approximately 121.6 grams, just over 4 ounces. That might not sound like much. You could hold it comfortably in the palm of one hand. But for scientists who had spent years preparing to analyze it, 121 grams of pristine, uncontaminated asteroid material was an almost incomprehensible treasure, because what mattered was not the weight. What mattered was what was inside. To understand why this sample is so remarkable, you first need to understand what Bennu actually is, and why scientists chose it as their destination in the first place. Bennu is a near-Earth asteroid roughly 500 meters across. It's about the size of the Empire State Building, give or take. It orbits the Sun on a path that brings it relatively close to Earth on a regular basis, which makes it both accessible to spacecraft and, incidentally, mildly concerning from a planetary defense standpoint. Bennu has a 1 in 1,750 chance of hitting Earth on September 24th, 2182. That risk is small enough that no one is losing sleep over it, but it is large enough to keep planetary defense scientists paying close attention. More importantly for our story, Bennu belongs to a class of asteroids called carbonaceous chondrites, some of the oldest, most chemically pristine objects in the solar system. These are essentially leftovers from the earliest moments of solar system formation, 4.5 billion years ago. They did not get heated up and melted, differentiated, or geologically reworked the way planets like Earth did. They are, in a very real sense, fossils of the primordial solar system. Studying them is like reading a diary written before Earth even existed. And the key to reading that diary accurately, as opposed to relying on meteorites that happen to fall to Earth and pick up contamination in the process, is bringing back a sample that has never touched our planet's atmosphere, water, or biology. That is exactly what OSIRIS-REx was designed to do. The mission launched in September 2016, spent 2 years cruising through space, and arrived at Bennu in December 2018. What the spacecraft found when it got there was already surprising. Scientists expected a relatively smooth surface covered in fine, sandy material, the kind of terrain where a spacecraft could gently press down and collect a sample without much trouble. Instead, Bennu turned out to be littered with boulders, jagged rocks, and rough terrain that made finding a suitable sampling site a genuine challenge. Eventually, the team identified a small patch of relatively clear ground in a crater called Nightingale, and in October 2020, the spacecraft executed one of the most delicate maneuvers in the history of robotic spaceflight. It descended, touched the surface for just a few seconds, fired a burst of nitrogen gas to stir up the surface material, and captured the resulting debris in its collection head. Then it backed away, carrying its cosmic cargo, and began the long journey home. When the full sample was finally open and analysis could begin in earnest, the first wave of results astonished researchers. Early analysis revealed dust-rich in carbon, nitrogen, and organic compounds, all of which are essential components for life as we know it. Dominated by clay minerals, particularly serpentine, the sample mirrors the type of rock found at mid-ocean ridges on Earth. That alone was striking. The surface of an ancient asteroid carrying minerals that look like what you would find at the deep ocean floor of our own planet. But then came the discovery that nobody had predicted. The sample also contained magnesium sodium phosphate, which was a surprise to the research team because it had not been seen in the remote sensing data collected from orbit. Nobody had seen it coming. The instruments aboard the spacecraft had given no hint of it. And phosphate is not just any mineral. These compounds are components of biochemistry for all known life on Earth today. Phosphates are part of the backbone of DNA. They drive the chemical reactions that power our cells. They are, in a very literal sense, ingredients of life. Scientists paused. They checked their results. They looked at the data again. And then the picture began to get even more interesting. The magnesium sodium phosphate found in the sample hints that the asteroid could have splintered off from an ancient, small, primitive ocean world. Think about what that means for a moment. Bennu is a rock floating in space, barely half a kilometer across. But the evidence locked within it suggests that it was not always like this. Long ago, billions of years ago, when our solar system was still young and chaotic, Bennu's material was part of something much larger. A parent body, perhaps hundreds of kilometers wide, that had liquid water on or inside it. An ancient world that was warm enough and wet enough to drive complex chemistry. And then something destroyed it. A collision, perhaps, or a gradual breakup, and the pieces scattered across the solar system. Bennu is one of those pieces, carrying within its rocks the chemical fingerprints of a world that no longer exists. The January 2025 papers published in the journal Nature added extraordinary detail to this picture. Scientists found minerals dominated by sodium, including carbonates, sulfates, chlorides, and fluorides, as well as potassium chloride and magnesium phosphate. Minerals that do not form just when water and rock react, but when water evaporates. They had never seen most of these sodium-rich minerals in meteorites before, but they are found in dried-up lake beds on Earth, places like Searles Lake in California, where ancient brine pools slowly evaporated over thousands of years and left behind their crystalline signatures. The sequence began with magnetite and sulfides, followed by calcium and magnesium carbonates. As the brine became more concentrated through evaporation, sodium-calcium carbonates appeared, then sodium phosphates, pure sodium carbonates, and finally chloride and fluoride salts. This is called an evaporate sequence. It is a chemical timeline, written in minerals, of how water behaved inside Bennu's parent body billions of years ago. It is a remarkable thing to hold in your mind. Those tiny dark grains of asteroid dust are not merely old rocks. They are the dried remains of a primordial ocean that evaporated before the Earth had finished forming. Finding evaporates indicates that the interior of Bennu's ancestor was warm enough to support liquid water for a substantial amount of time. And it is in the presence of liquid water that chemistry becomes biology, or at least begins taking its first tentative steps in that direction. The organic chemistry findings that emerged from the full sample analysis in early 2025 pushed the story further still, into territory that scientists are still processing. Among the most compelling detections were amino acids, 14 of the 20 that life on Earth uses to make proteins, and all 5 nucleobases that life on Earth uses to store and transmit genetic instructions in DNA and RNA. Pause there for a moment. All 5 nucleobases. The molecular letters of the genetic alphabet, adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, and uracil, every single one of them present on a rock that formed 4.5 billion years ago in the outer reaches of the early solar system. The team found about 10,000 different nitrogen-containing chemical species. The sheer diversity of the chemistry was staggering. One surprise was the amount of ammonia in the samples, 100 times more than in soils on Earth. That abundance of ammonia turns out to be crucial to understanding the story. Ammonia reacts with formaldehyde, also present on Bennu, to create many amino acids, giving a neat picture of how the abundance of materials came to be. So Bennu is not just carrying the ingredients of life, it is carrying a recipe for how those ingredients might have assembled themselves step by step under the right conditions of temperature and chemistry. The nitrogen-rich composition of carbamate compounds found in the sample may have played a role in the formation of amino acids, nucleobases, and other chemical precursors that could have contributed to the prebiotic inventory necessary for the emergence of life. And then, late in 2025, another paper pushed the findings one step further. A new analysis of Bennu samples tentatively but confidently identified tryptophan, increasing the tally of protein-building amino acids in the asteroid to 15 out of 20. Tryptophan is an amino acid you may have heard of. It is the one associated with the drowsiness some people feel after a large meal. But more importantly, it is one of the 20 building blocks of every protein in every living thing on Earth. And tryptophan had not been detected previously in any extraterrestrial materials before this discovery. Every new paper has pushed the count of biological amino acids found in Bennu higher. Now, it is absolutely essential to be clear about what this does and does not mean. There is no evidence that life evolved on Bennu or on Bennu's parent body. Finding the molecular ingredients of life is not the same as finding life. A kitchen full of flour, eggs, and sugar is not a cake, but it does mean that the chemistry which, under the right circumstances, could lead to life, was not somehow unique to Earth. It was not a once in a universe accident that happened to occur on one pale blue dot orbiting an unremarkable star. Data from OSIRIS-REx adds major brushstrokes to a picture of a solar system teeming with the potential for life. The building blocks were being assembled in space, on asteroids, in the cold and the dark, billions of years before the first single-celled organism ever stirred in a warm pool on Earth. There is one particularly haunting detail that scientists are still puzzling over. Many amino acids can be created in two mirror image versions, like a pair of left and right hands. Life on Earth almost exclusively produces the left-handed variety, but the Bennu samples contain an equal mixture of both. This is significant because if these amino acids had been delivered to early Earth by asteroids, which is one of the leading theories for how life got its chemical starter kit, then something on Earth must have later selected for the left-handed variety. What caused that selection? Why does all life on Earth use left-handed amino acids? That mystery remains unsolved, and the Bennu samples have made it sharper and more urgent than it has ever been before. The broader theory here, that asteroids and comets delivered the chemical precursors of life to early Earth through billions of years of bombardment, is not new. Scientists have been exploring this idea, sometimes called panspermia in its stronger form, or the delivery hypothesis in its more grounded version, for decades. Meteorites that have landed on Earth have previously shown hints of amino acids and other organic compounds. But those findings were always complicated by the question of contamination. The chemicals didn't get into the meteorite after it landed and sat in a field for centuries or even just weeks? The whole point of returning a pristine, sealed sample from space was to eliminate that uncertainty completely. And now that it has been done, the results are unambiguous. This chemistry was out there, in space, in the early solar system. It did not come from Earth. It predates Earth. The diversity of organics in Bennu is similar to that found in Japan's Ryugu samples, but with a more nitrogen-rich rather than sulfur-rich composition. This likely reflects the abundance of ammonia, which would have facilitated the production of amino acids and nitrogen-containing ring structures, for which ammonia is considered a potential precursor. Ryugu, the asteroid sampled by Japan's Hayabusa 2 mission, returned its own extraordinary cargo in 2020, and the comparison between the two asteroids is now one of the most productive lines of scientific inquiry in the field. Each one tells a slightly different story with a slightly different chemistry, pointing to slightly different histories. Together, they are building a picture of a solar system that was, in its earliest days, extraordinarily rich in the raw materials of complexity. And there is still more to come. The analysis of the Bennu sample is ongoing. Scientists have distributed portions of the material to laboratories all over the world, and the results continue to flow in. Analysis identified 16,000 molecular formulae consisting of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and magnesium, along with 33 amino acids in total. Each new technique applied to each new grain of dust has the potential to reveal something that no one has ever seen before. The sample is, in the truest sense, a gift that keeps giving. Meanwhile, the spacecraft that made it all possible did not retire after dropping off its precious cargo. OSIRIS-REx has been retasked and renamed OSIRIS-APEX and is now en route to another near-Earth asteroid, 99942 Apophis, a rock that will pass extraordinarily close to Earth in April 2029, close enough that it will be visible to the naked eye. The spacecraft will arrive just as Apophis makes its historic close approach, and scientists hope to study how Earth's gravity deforms and reshapes the asteroid during that encounter. Another chapter of asteroid science is already being written. But for now, the central story remains those tiny, dark grains of Bennu. That material sat undisturbed in the cold of space for 4.5 billion years, watching from a distance as the solar system formed, as planets coalesced, as life emerged on at least one small world, and as that life eventually built a spacecraft sophisticated enough to fly out to the asteroid, collect some of its dust, and bring it home. And when scientists finally pried open that stubborn container, after months of designing new tools, testing them, and carefully, painstakingly working inside that nitrogen-filled glove box, what they found inside was not just old rock and ancient chemistry. What they found was a mirror, a reflection of who we might be and where we might have come from. The amino acids in your body, the nucleobases in your DNA, the phosphates in the very cells that allow you to read and think and wonder, some version of those molecules, those exact molecular shapes, existed in the early solar system billions of years before Earth was finished forming. They drifted through space on asteroids, they fell through ancient skies, they dissolved into primordial oceans, and somewhere along a chain of events so long and improbable, and yet apparently not that improbable at all, they became you. That small, dark, unremarkable grain of dust was never really unremarkable. It was a letter, written at the very beginning of time, addressed to anyone curious enough to open it. And now, finally, we're learning to read what it says.